In 1971, 61% of Americans were middle class. Today, that number is 50%. That is a 50-year slow-motion disappearing act. This shift is often hidden by macroeconomic data. GDP is growing, unemployment is low, and the stock market is near record highs. Yet nearly half of all U.S. households did not earn enough in 2024 to cover basic necessities like rent, food, and healthcare. For these families, the margin for survival is razor thin. A single $1,000 increase in annual living costs would push another 3 million households below the line of basic solvency. When we look at these two realities side by side, it becomes clear that corporate equity and household bank accounts are measuring two different things. While the S&P 500 tracks the value of what companies produce, the average wallet tracks what workers are actually allowed to keep. This divide is currently bridged by debt. Total American household debt hit $18.8 trillion in early 2026, leaving the average family carrying over $105,000 in total liabilities. On paper, this looks sustainable. The debt payment to income ratio, the percentage of monthly income going toward debt service, sits at 11.3%. By this specific metric, the American middle class looks more stable than it did in the early 2000s. But checking account data tells a more urgent story. 1 in 4 families is living paycheck to paycheck, and nearly a quarter of Americans have zero emergency savings to fall back on. This is the reality of the modern workforce: employed, paying bills on time, and yet structurally incapable of absorbing a single financial shock. To understand how we got here, we have to look at 3 compounding gaps. This chart tracks worker productivity and compensation since 1979. Notice the steady rise of the top line representing productivity, diverging sharply from the nearly flat bottom line measuring compensation. For 47 years, what workers produce has detached from what they are paid. That widening space between the two lines represents national income. As the gap expands, corporations capture a historically high level of economic output. Consequently, the labor share of national income has dropped to the lowest level ever recorded by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We can see the result in the K-shaped economy. Over a single year, wages for high-income families rose 6%. For lower-income families, wages grew just 1.5%. The upper line goes up, the lower line goes down. The overall economy grew massively over the last half-century. The average worker's mathematical share of that growth intentionally shrank. That brings us to the second gap: costs. The American middle class historically rests on 3 pillars: owning a home, paying for education, and accessing healthcare. This bar chart illustrates why homeownership is failing. The block on the left shows the median household income of roughly $80,000. The block on the right is the $100,000 salary required to qualify for a standard median home. That $20,000 deficit makes the traditional housing pillar mathematically impossible for the typical family. Daily expenses have followed a similar trajectory. Typical U.S. rents increased 29% over 4 years, while basic groceries like meat and eggs surged 21% in a single year. When costs rise 10 to 20 times faster than wages, a middle-class income can no longer cover the cost of a middle-class life. When wages fail to cover these soaring costs, the deficit is bridged by credit. For 3 consecutive years, household spending growth has outpaced income growth. Families are borrowing money not to buy luxuries, but to maintain a baseline standard of living. Borrowing to eat today and paying with interest tomorrow creates a self-reinforcing trap. It erodes long-term stability through thousands of small, forced financial decisions made under intense economic pressure. This erosion is a recognized historical pattern. In America, it was driven by the removal of worker leverage. Union membership fell from 35% of workers to under 10% today, stripping away the primary mechanism workers used to capture those wage gains we saw earlier. Simultaneously, guaranteed economic structures were dismantled. Defined benefit pensions, which provided guaranteed retirement income, were entirely replaced by 401k accounts. This transferred all market risk away from the employer and directly onto the individual. Then, consumer credit deregulation in the 1980s and 90s provided easy access to debt. This made it possible to mask the wage gap with credit cards instead of addressing the underlying stagnation of pay. Consumer debt was never an economic solution. It was a delay tactic used to cover up a dismantled economic architecture. Navigating this squeeze requires a change in how we categorize debt. A mortgage creates equity in an asset. A credit card balance accruing 21% interest to pay for groceries is a drain on your future labor. High-interest consumer debt must be treated as a severe financial emergency. This shift changes the math on emergency savings. A liquid savings account yields a small return, but its primary value is its ability to prevent you from taking on 21% credit card debt when a crisis hits. In this system, the yield on an emergency fund is the high interest you avoid paying. Finally, recall the productivity gap from Act 2. Since the gains of the economy now flow to those who own the output rather than those who provide the labor, moving from a wage-only earner to an owner of assets is the only way to capture a share of that growth. Stability requires converting your temporary cash flow into ownership of things that retain value. The middle class is shrinking because the system built to support it was taken apart. Stop blaming yourself for these structural deficits and redirect your energy toward navigating the new reality. The system changed. You did not fail.